Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here, and today you're an Archmage competing to control the land of Astoria, a land of dragons. You'll be recruiting wizards from different schools of magic, building mythical towers, researching powerful spells, summoning helpful familiars, and searching the dark dungeons for gold and items of power. Lizard Wizard is for 2 to 5 players, takes 1.5 to 2 hours to play, is for ages 10 and up, and published by Forbidden Games. Today, we'll be doing a rule school where I'll teach you how to set up and play the game so that you don't have to read the rulebook yourself. Now I've placed timestamps below me, right in the description of this video, just in case you want to jump to a specific section of the rules. Without further ado, let's get started. In Lizard Wizard, you're going to be gaining different types of reagents, and there's a fluctuating market. They're going to be worth a certain amount of mana, and you'll be converting those, trying to time the market right to make the most mana possible. And you'll be using that mana for different things, like auctioning for different wizards. And you'll also be spending some of those reagents or money to get towers. And you're trying to pair up wizards with towers, and especially ones of the same school of magic to give you the most points at the end. The wizards will help you gain more reagents throughout the game as well. You'll also be spending mana on powerful spells, being able to cast them for abilities like taking any available card for free. But you'll also be able to pair those with your towers and wizards if they're from the same school of magic. And you might be gaining different familiars, allowing you to do all sorts of things like gaining gold, gaining reagents and casting spells, gaining new spells, or even entering the dungeon. Entering the dungeon allows you to press your luck to try to gain gold coins, which are points, and items. But you gotta watch out, because if you get hit twice by 2 monsters, well, everything goes back. And you'll be racing to be the first to get any of these achievements, which are randomized each game. So let's see if you can recruit wizards, build towers, cast spells, and enter the dungeon and have the most points in the end. To set up, you'll place the board in the middle of the table where everyone can reach it. The components that you've punched out and placed in their trays can be put off to the side where players can reach. At the top of the board, you'll see the name of the 7 different reagents in the game, which are essentially the resources. For each of those, you're going to find one of those tokens and place it on the corresponding spot at the bottom for number 1. Next, you're going to find the reagents deck. It's going to be shuffled, placed face down next to the board. Each player will get 3 of these cards dealt face down to them. Players can look at their own cards, but they don't want to show them to anybody else. From the reagent supply, each player is going to take 2 reagents, but they must be different. These blue tokens are mana. From the supply, give each player a total of 20 mana. Next, you're going to create the wizard deck, and you'll see the wizard cards like this with the red backs. With 4 and 5 players, you'll play with all of the wizards. If you're playing a 3-player game, you'll remove 1 wizard from each school of magic, and the school of magic is shown in the upper right-hand corner. It is simply these icons, and it shows you what the name of that school of magic is as well. If you're playing with 2 players, you would remove 2 wizards of each school of magic from the game. On the board, you'll find the spot that has the Recruit Wizards section, and here you'll see Wizard Deck. You'll shuffle that created wizard deck that you just made and place it right on the corresponding spot. You'll then flip over the first 2 wizards and put them right next to the deck as shown. Next, you're going to create the Towers deck. You'll find the Towers backed cards like this. Now, if you're playing with 4 and 5 players, you'll use all of the tower cards. If you're playing with 3 players, you remove all 7 tower cards with the cost of 4 from the game. If you're playing with 2 players, not only will you remove all of the ones with the cost of 4, you'll also remove all 7 cards with the cost of 1 from the game. So at this point, you might have different cards depending on the amount of players for this tower deck. In this case, I'm playing a 4-player game, so we have all of them in play. You're going to separate them out by the cost. So all the ones that cost 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s, meaning every single one that's in this pile is all 1s, all 2s, all 3s, all 4s, remembering that you may have removed all the 4s and all the 1s possibly if you were playing with the lower player counts as described earlier. But regardless of how many different piles you have, due to player count, you're going to take the highest cost pile, shuffle them up, and place them face down. Then you're going to take the next highest cost one that's there for you and shuffle them up and place them on top of the deck. Now, depending on your player count, if there were still stacks, you'd put the next highest one, shuffle it, and place it on top here. And again, depending on player count, there may also be another stack here. If so, you'll place that last one right on here. The number one costs are always at the top and they always get higher as you go down through the deck. You'll find the spot on the board that says Build Tower, and you'll see here the Tower deck. You'll place that constructed deck right there, and then you'll flip over the first card and place it right next to it. Next, you're going to find the deck of familiars. Next, you're going to separate out all of these cards looking at the mana in the upper left. There's going to be stacks of 5s, 10s, 15s, 20s, and 25s. With 4 and 5 players, you're going to play with all of the cards. If you're playing with 3 players, you'll remove all of the familiar cards with the cost of 25 mana. In a 2-player game, additionally, you will remove all of the cost of 5 mana. And just like the Tower deck, regardless of the amount of players, you're going to take the stacks that you have left and you're going to place the ones with the highest mana, in this case it's 25, shuffle these up and place them face down. You'll then shuffle up the next highest set, in this case it's 20, but again that might differ for you depending on your player count. And again, continuing this just like we did with the towers, so essentially they're going in ascending order, top to bottom for mana cost. Remembering that it's always going to be the lowest cost mana first and going all the way down, but remembering each stack of those different mana costs are all shuffled first. Then you're going to find the spot on the board that says Summon Familiar, and you'll see a spot for the familiar deck. Naturally, you'll place the deck that you just created right there. Then you're going to flip over the first 2 cards and place them just to the right, keeping in mind the number of this mana cost is going to differ depending on the player count. On the bottom right part of the board, you'll see the Research Spells area, and you'll see down on the bottom left of that area, the Spell deck. You'll always use all of the spells. You'll shuffle that deck up and place it right in that spot. Optionally, when creating the spell deck, you can remove all the cards with the stars on the bottom, which have some gotcha type interactions like stealing things from other players. Then you'll flip up the top 4 of those and place them in the corresponding spots on the board. Next, you're going to create the dungeon deck. First, from that dungeon deck, find the cards that say it's a trap and set them off to the side for now for possible use later. On the bottom left of the board, you'll see the dungeon spot here and a place for the dungeon deck. You're going to shuffle that entire dungeon deck now and you'll place it right on that spot. Next, you're going to find all of the achievement tiles. You're going to shuffle them up and randomly select 4 of them. The rest of those can be placed back in the box. You'll take those 4 selected achievements and place them at the upper right of the board in the corresponding spots face up. And finally, you'll randomly select a start player and give them this start player token. The object of the game is to have the most points, and you'll be getting points in different ways, like pairing together a wizard with a tower. But you'll get even more points if both of them come from the same school of magic, and even adding a spell of that type to this pair can give you some points as well, as long as they're cast. You're also going to be trying to have the most treasure items, because that's going to get you points as well, or maybe even second most. Coins are going to be straight points, and achievements, like being the first to 100 mana, will get you points as well. The game is played over multiple rounds, with each player taking a turn and going clockwise. Each player is going to perform 1 action on a turn, then it moves clockwise. So let's talk about what these different actions are. One action you can do is gathering reagents. Everyone is given these cards that are always secret. They're in your hand, they're not down on the table like this. And a player will select one of these cards to play and discard. Now, from the top half of the card, let's say we selected this one, you can select which 3 of these that you'll gather directly from the supply and place in front of you. Then, certain reagents are going to increase in value. Now, this card doesn't typically go here, but I've placed it to make it easier to facilitate teaching here. Now, even though you only get to select 3 on the top half to gather, all of these will increase value. So the horn is going to increase twice, so from 1 to 3. The mandrake's going to go up 1, and the toadstool is going to go up 1. So when taking these, it might have been smart to take this, and this, and this, because they're all going to increase in value. Meaning you've gotten something and you've just made it more valuable. Now when you play one of these cards and you finish this, it goes to a discard pile. Then you'll draw a new reagent card into your hand up to your maximum, which by default is 3, but there are some effects that can make that larger throughout the game. Now wizards will actually help you gain more reagents than what's on that card, but we'll go over that later when we talk about wizards. Now, we started with any 2 reagents and we just gained these 3. Now your storage limit by default is 10, and anytime you have more than 10 in front of you, you must immediately discard your choice of reagents back down to the supply to get to 10. And there is a way to increase your storage limit, but we'll go over that in just a bit. Now remember, you're just taking one action and it's going to the next player, but let's say on our next turn, we wanted to convert reagents to mana. Now let's say we had 2 horns. This is at a value of 3. We would place those back into the supply because we're converting them, and each of those are worth 3. So that would have gotten us 6 mana. Now because we sold 2 of those, it's also going to go down that many. 1, 2. So we have converted them to this much mana. In this case, it was 3 times 2 is 6, and it will go down 1 for each that we've sold, decreasing the value of that horn. Now, when you gain mana, you get it from the supply, put it in front of you. Remember, you also start with some mana as well. This is a form of currency that you'll be using throughout the game that we'll show you in a little bit. Now, another way to use the convert reagents action is to convert any number of different reagents. Now you can only do 1 of each and it can be different types, but they only convert for 1 reagent and you do not move these down. You won't do this action very often in the game, but it is a possibility if you sort of get stuck. A different action you can take on your turn is recruiting a wizard. Now we're going to talk about how to use that mana, which was that form of currency we got when we converted those reagents. Now here we have 2 possible wizards that we might want to get. To recruit them, you select one of them and essentially going to be in an auction. Now the player whose turn it is will start the auction. They'll bid with a certain amount of mana. You can never bid with more mana than you have. And it goes clockwise in successive manner. If you pass, you cannot come back in this auction. And whoever ends up bidding the highest pays that much mana to the supply and takes the wizard and puts it in front of them. Anyone else that loses does not spend any mana. So let's say we won and we'll pay 7 mana. That's what we bid to win, and we would put this in front of us. This would then replace with the next wizard. Now in a 2-player game, the player that starts the auction may only bid once, and the other player may either bid more or pass. Now remember, you want these wizards because they're going to help you get points at the end of the game, especially for putting them and pairing them with a tower, especially one with the same school of magic. But there's another benefit too. Earlier we talked about gaining reagents. And now if you do that, let's say we played this card and we said, hey, you know what, I want all 3 of these. Well, for every wizard you have, you also get the reagents that's in the upper left, regardless of which 3 you select here. So we could have selected this one, and this one, and we still, in addition, would also get this. Now you'd get that for every wizard you have. A different action you can take is to research a spell. Now there's always 4 available. Now to get one of these, you simply need to pay the cost in the upper left, in this case 5 mana here, and let's say we pay it. Now when you pay that, you take it from in front of you to the supply, and you take that card, you place it face down in front of you, and then a new spell will go into that spot. Now when you research this spell, you can decide to cast it right when you get it. But to do so, you must have these reagents to spend, like 3 horns and 1 nightshade. If you do, you can spend it, flip it over like this, it's cast, and you'll do what it says. In this case, steal 15 mana from another player. It's 1 time. Now again, you can play without these types of cards by removing them at setup. Now if you didn't want to enact this spell, or cast it right when you got it, it would go face down. You can look at it at any time to see what the cost is, but you leave it face down other than that. Another time you could cast this spell is when you take the Gather Reagents action. Remember, you select 3 of these. After gathering reagents, you can cast any one of your spells that haven't been cast yet. Now, speaking of casting spells, let's talk about the last way that allows you to do that, and that is summoning a familiar. Now there's always 2 available here, and to summon them, you're going to pay the mana cost in the upper left, in this case 5. Now when you do that, you have 4 different choices. Every card has 4 choices of what to do. Now one of them is you can gather reagents. So this is collect 3 mandrake and cast spells. So you would simply take 3 of those resources, and you could cast as many spells as you could afford with your reagents at that time. Now just under the spells is a summary of the 3 ways to cast the spell that we've talked about. One is when you gather reagents. When you do that, you can cast 1 spell. You can research a new spell like we showed, and you can cast that specific spell immediately with the cost. You'd spend those reagents. And the last one is the one we just taught you, which was when you summon a familiar, you collect the reagents that's on the card, you then can cast as many spells as you want as long as you can afford them. Now remember, any time that you summon a familiar, you have to pick one of these 4. We just talked about this. Maybe you did this instead. You'd get 1 gold for each enchantment card. Now keep in mind, that includes this card as well, which is enchantment. So you'll get a gold for this one, and all the other cards that you have, keeping in mind, one of you might have a face down spell card that has that there in the upper right hand corner as well. So you'd get 1 gold for each card with that school of magic, remembering that gold is straight points at the end of the game. Instead of those 2 options, you could new research. And to do that, you first take the 4 available spells and place them at the bottom of the spell deck. Then you'd refill all the spells from the top of the deck. Then from the 4 that were just revealed, you get to pick one and get it for free without paying the cost, and then this will get refilled. Keeping in mind, when you do place it in front of you, it's not yet cast, it has to be face down. Now remember, you're only selecting one of these 4, the last 4 we haven't talked about is entering the dungeon. Now entering the dungeon is sort of like a little press your luck game. You're going to flip a card up and it might be a few different things. It might be treasure, meaning gold, that's good. We'll just continue to keep pressing our luck here. We will get another card. Now, if it is a monster, you've been hit. If you get 2 hits, you have busted. So if I can stop now, keep the gold, this would get shuffled back into the deck, or I can press my luck. So let's say we do that, and here, well, we got a second monster. So we would shuffle these back into the deck, and we lost this, this would also get shuffled back into the deck. However, if instead, let's say when we drew that card, we have another treasure, but it's an item, the emeralds here. And let's say we want to stop. In this case, this would go back shuffled into the deck. The items you would just keep, and any gold you'd actually collect the gold. So in this case, we would get 1 gold from the supply, and we remove this card from the game. Which means that as the game goes on, if players have entered into the dungeon and kept coins and items and such, that means there's going to be more monsters here and less treasure. It's going to be a little more dangerous as the game goes on. Remember, whichever of the 4 actions you take for that when summoning that familiar, you will keep that card. So this was the one that we summoned. And remember, then, after you select your action and carried it out, you're going to put out a new familiar. Now the last action we haven't talked about was creating a tower. Now there's 1 available, and it's going to have a certain cost. It's going to be reagent, like in this case it's 1 nightshade, or 1 coin. So you'll pay either one of those from in front of you to the supply, and you'll get that tower and place it in front of you, and don't forget to replace it with another tower. Now keep in mind that achievements are going to give you 10 points for each of these at the end of the game that you have, and they're essentially a race. If you're the first one to have 5 wizards, or in this case 7 mandrakes, or 5 cards with the sorcery type of magic on them, or 100 mana, you'll take that and put it in front of you. Each of those that you get are worth 10 points at the end of the game, remembering that these are always different each game as well because they're shuffled and randomly placed out. Now towers do 2 things. Number 1, you're trying to pair it with a wizard. In this case, they're not from the same school of magic, but you'll want them to be, as we'll go over final scoring in just a moment. But the other thing is, your reagent capacity is 10 by default, but for every tower you have, you can increase that by 1. So right now, we have a total capacity of 11 reagents. Now players will continue taking turns until one of the decks of cards completely empties, meaning the cards that are here and the cards that are on the table. Towers, wizards, familiars, and spells. If any one of those is completely empty, meaning there's nothing left on the table itself, on the board, or in the stack, then that signals the end of the game. Now, that is the last round, which means the player who is sitting to the right of the player with the first player marker, meaning they're the last in turn order in clockwise fashion, will have the last turn of the game. Which means if it was that last player to the person sitting to the right of this that did empty out that card pile, then that actually would be the end. But if it was this player, then all other players are going to get a turn. You just basically make sure that everyone's had an equal number of turns. Then you'll go to final scoring, so let's show you an example of that. For each wizard and tower pair that is paired together and is from the same school of magic, this pair is worth 10 points. If you have a wizard paired with a tower but they don't match, then this pair is worth half that, which is 5 points. If you have cast spells, meaning they're face up and you actually were able to cast them throughout the game, if you have one that pairs with the same school of magic with a pair of wizard and tower from that same school of magic, it's worth 5 points. If you have an unpaired tower or wizard, it's simply worth 1 point. Coins are face value, so these 10 coins would be worth 10 points. Each achievement you've gotten are also worth 10 points. Now the player or players with the most treasure items, in this case I have 3 of them, would get 10 points. If there's more than one player, you'd both get 10 points and you would not give second place in that case. But if there's just one player that has the most, like this, we'd get 10, and second player would get 5 points. If there's multiples tied for second, they'd all get 5 points. The one that had the most points at the end is the winner. In case of a tied, the tied player with the most mana is the winner. There are details of an appendix of spell lists starting on page 16 if you need to look up a specific card. Well, I hope this helped you dive right into Lizard Wizard faster than you normally would if you had to read the rulebook yourself. Now, if you have further questions about the rules, I've placed the link below me in the description of this video, and that's the best place to ask them since I'll be notified, but so will Forbidden Games.